Some goodbyes are loud. Shouting, slammed doors, even dust rising behind a wagon wheel. But hers was silent. The last crust of bread still warm in her palm, a kiss so quick it barely touched her forehead. And then, hooves fading into the trees. No name called out, no promises made, just gone. She didn't cry. At 10 years old, Willa Thorne already knew what crying got you, a sore throat and no one listening. She stood barefoot on the trail, the hem of her dress torn, counting ants to pass the time and pretending they were family marching back for her. They never did. They never would. She had been the extra, not born to them, not chosen, just a burden with a mouth too small to speak and eyes too wide to hide. So when the sun dropped low and the trail turned gold, she didn't flinch at the sound of hooves returning. But this time, it wasn't a wagon full of strangers leaving. It was a man on a black horse, slow and deliberate, as if time answered to him. He didn't ask what happened, didn't ask if she was scared or sick or wanted a ride. He only asked, "You lost?" She shook her head. "Left." He dismounted, handed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth and a tin cup of water, then waited, saying nothing more. She took it. He turned his horse, glanced back once and said, "Let's go, Willa." She didn't ask where. She just followed the first person who stopped. Not because she was worth saving, but because someone finally believed she shouldn't have been left behind. The ride was long, not in miles, but in the kind of silence that wrapped around your ribs and squeezed slow. Willa sat behind him on the saddle, her arms not quite hugging his waist, more like resting there, unsure if she was allowed to hold on. The black horse moved steady, as if it too understood there was no need to rush. The man hadn't said much since offering her the biscuit. His name hadn't come up. Neither had hers again. But when they passed a stand of cottonwoods and the trail forked, he took the right path, away from town, toward open country. She didn't ask why. By the time the sun dipped behind the distant ridge, the trail opened to a stretch of land so wide it looked like the end of the world. And right in the middle of it stood a house. Not the kind slapped together with scrap and prayer. This one was real. A white fenced porch stretched across the front, 2 chimneys, a barn off to the left, and silence so thick you could fold it. "You live here?" she asked, voice catching like she hadn't used it in hours. "I do," he said, dismounting. He turned and reached for her. She hesitated only a second before letting him lift her down. Her bare feet touched the dust. She wobbled, still holding the now crumbled biscuit. "Come on," he said. "Ain't much, but it's clean." He didn't guide her with a hand on her back. He didn't point where to go. Just opened the front door and stepped aside. Willa stood on the threshold like she was about to cross into a church. Inside was warm wood, shelves with books, a real rug, not patched, not fraying. She moved like someone afraid to leave footprints. He nodded toward the hallway. "Pick a room. They're all empty." She blinked. "All?" She patted down the hall, peeking into each doorway. Every room had a bed, a quilt, a window that didn't rattle in the wind. One room caught the last of the evening sun. She stepped in, the light painting the floor in gold. She sat on the edge of the bed. It didn't creak. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway, holding folded clothes. "They're big, but they're clean." She nodded, setting the biscuit aside like it was still too valuable to throw away. He lingered. "Got a last name?" She stared out the window. "Used to want one." He tilted his head, thinking. Then said, "Mine's Rourke. Ellis Rourke." She looked up. He wasn't offering it like a prize, more like a coat hung on a peg. Take it or leave it. "You can have it," he said after a pause, "if you want to wear it." She swallowed hard. "Just like that?" He shrugged. "A name don't cost me anything, but I know what it's worth." Then he left the clothes and walked away. That night, Willa washed her face at the basin, put on the oversized shirt, and crawled beneath the quilt like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't scared, but because it was the first time fear hadn't come with yelling or fists or being told she took up too much space. She lay still for a long time, waiting. No one came, no footsteps down the hall, no locks turning, no one calling her a burden. Just the soft creak of a porch swing and the faint clink of a tin cup on wood. And when the dark settled, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like rest. Will awoke before the sun, not from a noise, but from the absence of one. No shouting, no boot stomping, no one telling her she was late for something that was never explained. For a long moment, she just lay there. The shirt she wore smelled like cedar and saddle leather. The quilt was heavy, not from dirt, but from care. She clutched it tighter, listening. Then she smelled it, bacon. Her bare feet made no sound on the floorboards as she padded down the hallway. The house creaked like an old tree, not with menace, but memory. She peeked into the kitchen and found him there. Ellis Rourke. He was at the stove, frying strips of meat with one hand, while cracking eggs into a skillet with the other. The window above the sink glowed with the kind of light that meant morning wasn't here yet, but coming fast. He didn't look up. "You eat eggs?" he asked. Willa nodded. "You allergic to anything?" She shook her head. "Then sit." There was no scolding, no long look asking what she was doing up. Just a plate set on the table and a tin cup of milk beside it. She sat. The eggs were soft, the bacon crisp. She took slow bites, waiting for the questions to come, but they didn't. Not where'd you come from, not why were you alone, not who left you behind. And that, more than anything, made her want to answer. After a while, he sat across from her with his own plate, eating in silence. The only sound in the kitchen was the scrape of forks and the crackle of the stove fire. When she finished, he slid a second cup of milk toward her. "You can stay here today, or come with me." She blinked. "I've got to ride the fence line. Won't be gone long. If you'd rather stay back, that's fine. I just don't leave folks alone unless they say it's all right." No one had ever asked her what she preferred. They'd told her, ordered her, or ignored her entirely. "I'll ride," she said, surprising herself. He nodded once and stood. Out by the barn, the same black horse waited, tossing its head like it already knew the trail. But next to it stood a smaller roan, steady-legged with kind eyes. Willa stopped beside it. "She's yours if you stay," Ellis said, adjusting the saddle. "Name her whatever suits." Willa didn't speak. Her throat was tight again. She couldn't remember the last time something was offered to her without strings. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He cinched the girth strap and didn't turn around. "Because when I was 10, nobody did." They rode out slow. Willa's legs didn't quite know what to do, and the roan sensed it, walking careful. Ellis didn't coach or rush her. He simply rode alongside, pointing when there was something worth seeing. A hawk perched on a fence post, a set of coyote tracks, a stretch of rusted wire that needed mending. At the edge of the eastern pasture, he dismounted and pulled a coil of wire from his saddlebag. "This one's gone slack," he said. "You see the way the post leans?" Willa nodded. "Means the ground's soft there. You patch that lazy, it'll just fall again next storm." He showed her how to set a brace, how to drive a spike without splitting the wood, how to loop and pull wire without slicing your hands open. His voice stayed even the whole time, like he wasn't explaining to a child, just to someone who might one day do it on their own. And Willa listened like it mattered, because somehow it did. By midday, the sun was high and warm across her shoulders. They paused near a creek bed where wildflowers clung to the banks. Ellis handed her a canteen and some jerky. She chewed in silence, then glanced at him. "You don't talk much," she said. He shrugged. "Never saw the point of filling air if you ain't got something worth putting in it." That made her smile. Not a big one, but it showed. They rode back toward the house as the light softened and shadows stretched. When the porch came into view, Willa let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It felt safe. She didn't know why. She just did. That evening, she helped him feed the chickens, even though he didn't ask. She filled the water troughs, collected eggs, and stacked kindling by the hearth. Not because she was told, because she wanted to. Inside, Ellis lit a lantern and set it between them on the kitchen table. He was carving something, a broken rake handle into something smaller. Willa sat across from him, holding a piece of string she'd found in the drawer, weaving it between her fingers. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a kind of peace she hadn't known existed. "Do I gotta earn it?" she asked finally. He looked up. "Earn what?" "The name." He leaned back in his chair. You don't gotta earn what someone offers freely. Just carry it right. Willa nodded. He didn't say more. Didn't need to. When she went to bed that night, she placed the folded clothes he'd given her into the dresser drawer. They weren't hers yet, not really, but they would be. And for the first time in her life, Willa Thorne went to sleep thinking tomorrow might not be worse. The storm came fast, wind first, sharp, sudden, slapping shutters and rattling the porch rail. Then the rain, heavy as a spill from heaven, hammering the tin roof like it meant to break through. Thunder rolled across the hills in long, aching groans, and Willa sat curled in the armchair near the fire, knees hugged tight beneath one of Ellis's flannel shirts. He didn't ask if she was scared. He just brought her a dry biscuit and sat across from her with a book he didn't open. For a long while there was only the fire's crackle and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the land being washed clean. Then he stood. From the hallway closet, he pulled out a thick bundle wrapped in twine and brown paper. Willa watched, wary. "This was my sister's," he said, setting it gently on the table. "She died last winter." Willa's eyes darted to his face. He didn't speak like a man digging through grief, just a man speaking plain truth. "She'd want it used," he added, "not packed away like a memory no one can touch." She didn't move. Her fingers dug into the arm of the chair. The idea of touching something that belonged to someone who mattered to Ellis, it felt dangerous, like it might burn her. "You don't have to take it," he said, backing off, "but it's here if you need it." Outside, lightning tore the sky in half. The windows glowed white, then dark again. The wind screamed down the chimney, and slowly, slowly, Willa stood. She crossed the room barefoot, unwrapped the coat with careful fingers, and slid it over her shoulders. It smelled like cedar and faint smoke, like safety. "Thank you," she whispered. Ellis didn't smile. He just nodded. The fire burned low as the storm passed, and Willa leaned back into the chair, wrapped in the coat and something harder to name. Something that settled in her bones like warmth that wouldn't leave. The next morning the sun came back, almost shy, peeking through a sky scrubbed clean. Willa woke to the smell of coffee and saw Ellis already outside feeding the animals. She stepped out in the coat. It hung past her knees and made her look smaller, but not weaker. Ellis noticed, said nothing, but his eyes softened. That afternoon she helped him repair a busted trough. When a nail pricked her thumb, she sucked in a breath, but didn't cry. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." And she was. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd been given space to hurt without fear. 3 weeks passed like a breath. Willa ate without guilt, slept without flinching, and slowly learned that silence could be safe. She spoke more, asked questions, laughed once. Ellis never mentioned it, but his eyes always lingered a moment longer when she did. Then one morning, he hitched the wagon. "We're going to town," he said, tying down a crate. "Don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want. Just need supplies." Willa's gut twisted. "You'll stay close?" "I don't leave people I bring." She changed into the cleanest clothes he'd set aside for her. The ones he didn't say were new, but she knew. He'd even tied a ribbon into the bag of sweets he'd packed. He hadn't mentioned that either. The town of Eri Chukur was quiet, but not sleepy. Folks moved with purpose. Women with baskets, men with crates, children darting between rail posts. But when Willa stepped off the wagon, silence followed. Eyes trailed her like she was a question nobody had asked but everyone had an answer for. Ellis didn't say a word, just walked beside her, steady as stone. At the mercantile, he handed her a basket. "Pick what you want." Within reason, Willa hesitated. "For me?" He raised a brow. "Unless I look like the type to wear blue ribbon soap." She blinked and then snorted. A laugh, short and sudden. It caught them both off guard. The shopkeeper stared but said nothing when Ellis nodded. At the counter, Ellis added fabric, needles, a hairbrush, and a book about wild ponies to her pile. "For her," he said. Outside, 2 women near the livery leaned in, whispering like hens in a storm. One called out, "That one yours?" Willa froze. Ellis didn't. "She is now." They rode back in silence, the kind that hummed with things too big for words. Willa clutched the book in her lap, the ribbon still tied tight. "You didn't have to say that," she said quietly. "Say what?" That I'm yours. He guided the reins with one hand. Didn't say it for them, he said. Said it for you. And just like that, something cracked open in her chest. Quietly, finally. That night, as the fire burned low, Ellis rummaged through the old roll-top desk in the den. He pulled out a letter, yellowed and careful. My sister's will, he said. She owned half this ranch, left it to whoever had the same fight she did. He looked up at Willa. Doesn't say blood, says heart. Then he handed her a smaller envelope with her name. This makes you guardian of the eastern pasture. It's not everything, but it's something. Willa took it like it weighed more than her own bones. Why? Ellis leaned back. Because when I'm gone, I want this land in the hands of someone who knows what it means to be unwanted, and who chose to stay anyway. She couldn't speak, didn't need to, because for the first time in her life, the future didn't scare her. It waited. The first time Willa saw him, he looked like something the wind dragged in. Dust on his coat, sweat on his collar, and a face carved out of hard miles and harder intentions. He rode in slow, like he wanted to be seen. Willa was brushing one of the mares in the paddock when the dog, Ash, let out a low growl near the porch. She looked up just as the rider dismounted, heavy boots hitting the earth with a dull thud. Ellis Rourke live here? The man asked, voice rough, like rust dragged over stone. Willa didn't speak, just nodded once and pointed toward the eastern pasture. The man didn't thank her, just tipped his hat and walked like he already owned the place. By the time Ellis rode back up the hill, the stranger was waiting by the rail, leaning like he'd built it himself. Name's Gideon Wexley, he said before Ellis could ask. I reckon you remember my father. Ellis didn't flinch. I do. I also remember he signed over that pasture before he died. Gideon smirked and pulled a folded deed from his coat. Funny thing, turns out it was never properly contested, and now I've got the papers to say it's still ours. Ellis took the page, read it once, then again, his jaw tight. You're 20 years too late. Only if someone told me sooner. He glanced past Ellis toward the house, toward the ridge where the eastern field rolled wide and golden. His gaze lingered. And I heard there's a girl staying out there, he added. Some stray you picked up on the road? She living in the old pasture cabin like it's hers? Willa froze behind the barn wall. Every word felt aimed. Ellis didn't blink. She's earned her place. She ain't got no name, no claim, and no blood to back her, Gideon said, stepping closer. But I do. Ellis handed the paper back with the same calm he always carried before a storm. Then I guess we'll see if paper means more than character. Gideon smirked. I'll be back, with more than just talk. He mounted up and rode off without looking back. That evening, Willa sat on the porch with her knees drawn up. Ash lay at her feet, head alert. I don't really have a legal claim, do I? She asked, not looking at Ellis. No, he said honestly. Not yet. Not in the eyes of the law. She nodded. But in the eyes of this land, you do. He didn't speak it like comfort. He said it like fact, and Willa took it that way. 2 days passed. Rain returned briefly. They kept working, repairing fence posts, moving feed, stacking hay in the loft. Ellis taught her how to patch the roof without sliding off, how to keep foxes from the coop, how to tighten a saddle so it didn't chafe the horse. Willa didn't ask for his time anymore. He gave it freely. And then Gideon came back, but not alone. 2 men rode with him this time, one long and lean, the other built like a stone wall. Their eyes held nothing but calculation, no curiosity, no kindness. Ellis was gone, down in town for supplies. Willa saw them first from the porch and didn't flinch. She didn't even move at first. She waited, let them dismount, let them approach. Gideon stepped forward, smirking like a fox circling the hen house. Well now, he said, looking her up and down. Little lady defending land that doesn't carry her name? She said nothing. You've got 2 options, he continued. Walk away now and I don't raise a hand. Stay and things get complicated. Willa glanced toward the barn, the coop, the fields rolling behind her like folded gold. I already live here, she said, voice low, and I'll stay. Gideon's lip curled. You think a girl can hold a ranch? No, she replied. I know I can. From behind the porch door, she reached for the shotgun Ellis had left leaning in the corner. She didn't aim it. She just held it. Calm. Certain. Leave, she said, or we'll let the courts and the newspapers know a land baron came to threaten a minor with a firearm on her own front porch. Gideon's face turned to stone. The men behind him shifted, uncertain now. You're bluffing, he hissed. Willa's hand never wavered. Try me. A long pause. Then slowly, Gideon backed toward his horse. This ain't over, he growled. It is for you. They rode off in silence. No bullets, no blood. Just the sound of a girl standing her ground and three men too afraid to test her. When Ellis returned, Willa was still on the porch. The gun leaned beside her. Ash sat close. They came, she said. I figured they might, Ellis answered, tying off the reins. I handled it. He nodded once. Of course you did. That night, Willa didn't speak much. She didn't have to. She'd done more than defend land. She'd defended her place. And somehow that made all the difference. Willa had always believed that things broke before they grew. She'd seen it in fences, in bones, in people. But as she stood on the ridge that morning with the wind tugging at her coat, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and a ranch soaked to its bones. She'd helped Ellis check the chickens, patch the back coop where the roof leaked, and reroute the trough drain that had clogged with mud. It felt good, earning her rest. Not just being allowed to stay, but being co. It was nearly dusk when she saw him, a figure near the small, still. Willa dropped her pail and wall. He didn't run, didn't flinch, just stared, barefoot and mud-splattered, his eyes rimmed with red. Willa knelt a few feet away. You hungry? She asked. He nodded. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out half a biscuit from breakfast, and handed it over. He took it, biting down like it might vanish. Where's your family? He didn't answer, just pointed behind him, toward the empty trail winding out of the woods. Willa looked, nothing but silence and the last gold streaks of sun. Got a name? Benji. It was the first word he'd spoken. Small, cracked, but real. Willa stood. Come on, she said, turning toward the house. You can warm up first. Benji followed without hesitation. Ellis was on the porch when they reached it. He raised a brow, arms crossed, eyes on the boy behind her. Another orphan? He asked, voice soft but steady. Willa nodded. Looks like. You collecting us now? Willa met his gaze. Someone collected me once. A long pause. Then Ellis stepped aside and opened the door. Benji sat stiffly at the table while Willa heated the stew. Ash watched him from the rug near the fire, tail thumping once. She set a plate down, added a spoon, and waited. He didn't ask if he could eat. He just did. Later that night, Ellis came in from the barn, hands cold, face thoughtful. Willa was wrapping a spare blanket around Benji near the hearth. He say where he came from? Ellis asked. She shook her head. Doesn't matter much. He know what staying here means? Not yet. Ellis nodded. Then you'd better be the one to tell him. In the morning, Willa found Benji sitting by the chicken coop, watching the hens like they might tell him something. She walked over, crouched beside him. This place, she said, isn't just about food or shelter. It's about care. He looked at her uncertain. You help, she said. You listen. You treat what's here like it matters. That's how it works. Benji nodded, small but certain. Then yeah, she said. You can stay. That afternoon, Ellis handed Willa a folded paper as they stood beneath the porch. She unfolded it slowly. The title was simple. Eastern Pasture Guardianship, Revised. Willa's name was at the top, and below it, in fresh ink, another line. Pending addition, Benji Thorne. Her breath caught. You're putting him down too? She whispered. I am, Ellis replied. If you agree, this land belongs to folks who know what it means to be left. I reckon that makes you both better keepers than most born into it. Willa didn't speak right away, but her hands didn't shake this time. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch. Willa with a mug of cider, Ellis whittling something small, Benji curled up under a blanket beside Ash. The sky stretched wide above them, painted in streaks of amber and plum. I used to think home was something other people got, Willa said quietly. Ellis looked up. And now? He asked. She glanced at Benji, asleep and warm. Now I think it's something you build. The porch creaked as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and the last hum of summer. They didn't need more words, not when the silence between them was finally full. The morning started with frost, thin and sharp over the barn roof. Willa lit the stove before dawn, fed the hens, and checked on Benji, still snoring under the quilt. Ellis had ridden into Airy Chuker the night before for a delivery. Just one night, he'd said. Just one. She stood on the porch sipping cider, eyes sweeping the horizon like Ellis had taught her. That's when she saw the dust. 3 riders. No mail delivery. No neighbors. Trouble. She stepped off the porch, slow but steady, her fingers curling toward the shotgun propped by the door. Ash growled low behind her. The lead rider didn't wait. He dismounted like he owned the land. Spurs sharp, gloves spotless. Gideon Wexley. Behind him, 2 hired guns. Lean men with twitchy eyes and hands never far from their belts. Willa didn't speak first. Gideon did. Didn't expect to find you standing tall, he said, voice like cold grease. Heard Dalton's boy left this place to a girl with no deed and no blood. Seems reckless. It's not his name anymore, she said evenly. It's mine. Rourke. Gideon raised an eyebrow. Big words for a foundling. Benji peeked from the doorway. Willa gave a quick shake of her head, back inside. You've come before, she said, stepping closer to the porch rail. And you left empty. He smirked. This time's different. This time I brought witnesses. This time I brought a document with a judge's seal. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and waved it like a flag. Claiming the eastern pasture. You might have patched that wire and milked that cow, but legally it was never yours. Willa didn't move. Her voice stayed low. We don't measure ownership in this house by seals. We measure it in blisters. Gideon chuckled. Cute, but blisters don't hold up in court. And that pasture? It's valuable. I'm taking it. You can try. She grabbed the shotgun and stepped off the porch. The other men tensed. Don't, she warned, finger near the trigger. You'll want to walk away while you still can. Gideon took a single step forward. Then, a rifle cracked. Dust kicked up an inch from his boot. Willa didn't fire. That shot came from the trees. Gideon whirled. Who the hell? Another shot, this time near the horses. One reared and bolted. From the ridgeline, Ellis Rourke emerged on horseback, rifle balanced easy in his arms, eyes hard as stone. You come to take what isn't yours, Wukwana, he called. Try it, Gideon snarled. You can't scare me, Rourke. I'm not trying to scare you, Ellis said. I'm reminding you who taught you to shoot, and who you never once beat. The hired guns hesitated. The one on the left dropped his hand from his pistol. Gideon spat in the dirt. This ain't over. It is, Willa said. She tossed a small bundle toward him. His deed, crumpled and marked with red ink. Judge Harlan saw it yesterday. Said it's older than the hills and worth less than the mud under my boots. Gideon's eyes burned. You think this land means something? You think a little girl and a ghost of a rancher can hold it forever? No, Ellis said, dismounting beside Willa. But we'll hold it today. And if you come back tomorrow, we'll hold it then too. For a second, no one moved. Then the second gunman turned his horse and rode off without a word. The third followed. Gideon stayed another moment, jaw tight, eyes flicking from Willa to Ellis and back. You'll regret this, he hissed. Maybe, Willa said, but not today. And with that, he turned, mounted, and vanished over the ridge. That night, the wind blew strong, but warm. Willa repainted the sign above the gate by lantern light. The names were clear, bold, and steady. Rourke, Willa, Benji. Inside, Ellis cleaned the rifle and handed it to her with a nod. Next time, he said, you take the first shot. She grinned. I plan to. Benji leaned against the doorframe, holding a wooden carving of a chicken in one hand and a hammer in the other. You think we're safe now? He asked. Willa looked out at the stars. I think we're seen now, and that's scarier to men like him. Ellis added, and safer too. They didn't speak more. The wind said enough. Willa went to bed that night not with fear, but with a certainty that didn't need blood or paper. Just action. Just standing when it counted. And in the morning, the chickens didn't care about land disputes or deeds. They just needed feeding. So she fed them, with hands calloused by work, not waiting. Because she wasn't a shadow anymore. She was the name on the gate. A week passed, then two. The chill of early spring gave way to thawed fields and waking bees, and life at Redwood Ranch began to steady again. Willa woke with the sun, fed the chickens, mended fences, and taught Benji how to read from the book Ellis kept in the den. Ellis rode into town only when necessary, wary of more papers, more names trying to unmake what they'd built. But no word came. Gideon Wexley had vanished like a snake retreating into its den. Then one afternoon, as Willa helped Ellis dig the foundation for a new smokehouse, a rider crested the ridge. Not fast, not threatening, just steady. A woman dismounted at the fence line, a slender figure in a blue coat, spectacles resting low on her nose. She carried a leather satchel and moved like someone with purpose, not malice. "You Ellis Rourke?" she called. Ellis stepped forward, shovel in hand. "Depends who's asking." "Miriam Wells. I'm a legal clerk out of Jefferson County. Probate division. Got something that might belong to you." Willa wiped her hands and approached slowly. Miriam reached into her satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This came across my desk last week. Part of an unfiled claim from the Wexley estate. Turns out your name and hers were mentioned." Ellis took the envelope, eyes narrowed. "Go on." "Seems there was an old land agreement, unsigned but notarized, from Elias Rourke, your father, I believe, and Jedediah Wexley, Gideon's grandfather. Traded eastern grazing rights for emergency winter feed during the drought of '49. The condition was the land would stay with the Rourkes unless reclaimed in writing within 20 years. Ellis let out a slow breath. "That window closed near 15 years ago." Miriam nodded. "Exactly, which makes every claim Gideon tried to file not just invalid, but fraudulent." Willa blinked. "So the pasture is yours, full title, no more arguments." Miriam handed Ellis a second envelope, thicker, official-looking. "These are the new deed papers, filed, signed, sealed. There's even a mention of a junior heir." She smiled faintly at Willa. "He put your name down before he rode into town last time. Said he had a feeling he'd need to make it official." Willa felt her heart lurch. She looked at Ellis, who was already watching her. "I knew the land was yours," he said, "but now the county does too." Miriam tipped her hat. "I'll be off. Just wanted to deliver it myself. I don't much care for men like Gideon. Makes my job easier when they lose." They watched her ride off, the dust trailing like the end of a long story. Willa opened the second envelope slowly. Inside, her name, Willa Thorne Rourke, written in the same blocky handwriting Ellis used when labeling fence rows and flour sacks. Below that, guardian and steward of the eastern grazing fields, Redwood Ranch. "You didn't tell me," she whispered. Ellis shrugged. "Didn't want to jinx it. Didn't want to promise something unless it could be held." Benji came running from the barn, apron tied backward, holding up a broken bridle. "We need you," he called. "The mare kicked it clean off again." Willa folded the deed carefully, pressed it to her chest for a moment, then tucked it into her coat. "Let's go," she said, turning toward the barn. Ellis smiled. Ranch won't fix itself. That evening, Willa sat at the old writing desk, hands ink-stained, eyes steady. She penned a letter, not to anyone in particular, but to the past, to the girl left barefoot on a trail, to every name that once meant nothing. She ended it with 4 words. "It's ours. It's earned." Then she stepped outside where the wind had died down and the trees stood still. She hammered the deed to the inside of the barn door, where the morning sun would always catch it. Not for pride, not for show, but as proof that some roots grow deeper when they're chosen, and that sometimes the land remembers who stood when everyone else rode away. Not every battle ends with gunfire. Some end with a quiet girl standing her ground, in boots too big, on land too hard, with a name she chose for herself. Willa Thorne wasn't born into a family. She built one. And when the world came knocking to take it all away, she answered with silence, with steadiness, and with a shotgun she never had to fire. If this story stayed with you, if Ellis Rourke reminded you of someone who once stood by you without needing to say a word, if you felt the weight of Willa's stand at Redwood Ranch, then leave us a comment below. What moment hit the hardest? Which line made you stop and feel something? And most of all, where in the world are you watching from? Your porch, your city, your country. Every voice here matters. This is Wild West Stories, and out here, we remember the ones who stayed. The train never came. Not that she noticed the schedule. She wasn't there to leave. She knelt between the rails, her wedding dress soaked in blood that wasn't hers. Veil tangled in the wind, hands trembling, but not from fear, from everything else. Her boots had dried mud on them, yesterday's storm, or maybe just the past refusing to let go. Somewhere out there, her father's body still lay where they'd left him. Somewhere, the church still smelled of gunpowder and lies. Seraphine Vale had been promised a future. What she got was a massacre wrapped in vows. Now she waited, for what she didn't know. A noise stirred beyond the pine line. Hooves, not fast but steady. She didn't lift her head, didn't have to. She felt him before she saw him. The man on the horse said nothing, just looked at her like he already knew the story. Then without a word, he reached down, and she let him lift her. Not because she trusted him, but because everyone else had already walked away. The wind didn't ask questions. It just kept moving. It threaded itself through the torn lace of her gown, lifted strands of hair from her cheeks like fingers she didn't welcome, and blew cold enough to turn the blood on her dress into frozen shapes. Seraphine Vale sat still between the iron rails, her knees drawn in, head bowed. Somewhere to the east, a train whistle called once and fell silent. She didn't turn toward it. There would be no trains today, maybe not ever again. The wedding dress had once been ivory. The veil, delicate and hand-stitched by a woman long dead, had slipped down her shoulders, tangled now around her wrists like a forgotten promise. The blood was thickest at the hem, where she'd cradled her father's body as the last warmth left him. She hadn't cried then, but she had cried after. Hours of it, soundless, violent. The kind that empties you until there's nothing left but breath. And now, not even that. She didn't notice the hoofbeats at first. The wind had a way of stealing sound in wide places. But when the shadow fell over her lap, she looked up. Not because she was ready, just because something shifted. A man sat atop a horse, the color of storm clouds. His face was shadowed beneath a brim low and stiff with ice. Braided hair rested over a thick coat that had seen more winters than most men survived. A rifle was slung across his back, but his hands were empty. Still, he didn't speak, didn't ask. He just looked at her like he already knew the story and didn't think less of her for it. Then slowly, he dismounted. The snow whispered under his boots as he stepped forward. He moved with the kind of silence that wasn't just lack of sound, but the practiced absence of presence. She watched him kneel beside her, offer a leather-gloved hand. Her first instinct was to recoil. Her second was to break. She did neither. She let him lift her. They rode for a long time. At first, she sat stiff behind him, her arms unsure of where to rest. Eventually, she gave in and let her fingers curl around the thick belt that crossed his coat. He didn't move or flinch, just rode. The horse's breath steamed the air in quiet pulses. The rhythm of its hooves became a kind of lullaby. Trees passed like silent sentinels. The wind softened. At some point, she rested her forehead between his shoulders. The silence stretched. Not empty, just deep. They crossed a half-frozen stream where the rocks glistened like buried coins. The moon slid behind the clouds, and still he said nothing. Seraphine drifted in and out of thought. In her mind, her father's voice returned, clearer now than it had been in weeks. Not all men come with words, girl. Some carry truth in what they don't say. She hadn't understood it then. She did now. The cabin came into view just as the last blue light of evening began to fade. It sat tucked into the trees like it had grown there, crooked chimney and all. Snow had gathered thick on the roof, undisturbed. A single candle flickered in the small window, either forgotten or meant as a welcome. He dismounted first, then helped her down, steadying her without touching her more than necessary. When her knees buckled, he didn't catch her. He braced her. There's a difference. Inside, the air held the bite of a place recently unoccupied. The stone hearth was cold, the woodpile near empty. Still, he moved without hesitation, stoking embers, adding slats of bark, coaxing life back into the fire like a ritual he'd done alone too many nights to count. Seraphine stood by the doorway, unsure whether she'd been brought here for shelter or to be forgotten again. He didn't ask her to sit, but when the flames caught and the cabin glowed gold with warmth, he set down a heavy coat and a cup of tea on the low table. Then he sat, across from her, in the single chair, and waited. She took the tea, slowly, fingers trembling, and still, no words, not from either of them. Only the crackling fire and the soft sounds of snow giving up against the roof. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to him, it was to the air. He said he loved me. The sentence hung there, unwelcomed but unchallenged. He didn't answer, didn't blink. She didn't explain, didn't name names. She didn't have to. The dress spoke enough. Later, when the night had deepened and the fire sank into orange coals, he stood, gestured toward the cot. She shook her head. He left it alone. Just pulled his coat tighter, sat back in the chair, and tilted his head toward the fire like it held more comfort than any bed ever could. She lay curled on the floor near the fire, wrapped in the coat, listening to the wind, to the trees, to him, and for the first time since the massacre, she slept. She woke with the cold clinging to her bones. The fire had burned down to its last breath, and the shadows inside the cabin stretched long and silent across the wooden floor like the memory of something that had already passed. At first she didn't move. Lying there on the rug, wrapped in the wool blanket Rusk had given her, Seraphine simply stared at the ceiling, watching the way light from the moon slipped through a knot in the wood, casting pale lines like scars across the beams. She breathed in, held it, released, and felt everything at once. Not like the night before, when the numbness had shielded her. This was worse. This was remembering. Her throat hurt, like she'd swallowed rocks. But it wasn't from screaming. She hadn't made a sound since that night. Not really, not until the words had slipped out in the firelight hours ago. They killed him because of me. She hadn't meant to say it, but once it left her lips, it settled around the cabin like dust, impossible to ignore. She thought maybe Rusk would react, ask questions, get angry. He hadn't. He just sat there across from her, watching the fire, as if her confession was nothing more than smoke rising into the rafters. Now with dawn creeping over the pines outside, she sat up slowly. Every joint ached. Her knees screamed from the day before. Her back was stiff. Her stomach growled. But it didn't matter. She rose, moved to the window. Outside, the world was covered in white, untouched. The snow blanketed everything with silence, hiding all sins. If only it worked on memories. The chair where Rusk had slept was empty. She turned quickly, startled by the absence. Her eyes scanned the room. Door cracked open, no sound. She stepped forward, pulled it wider. The cold hit her like a slap. But there he was, 10 yards away, standing still beneath a pine tree, arms folded, watching the horizon like it owed him something. She didn't call out, didn't move closer. But somehow he knew she was there. He turned just slightly, and their eyes met across the distance. It lasted only a second. Then he looked away again. Still didn't speak, still didn't smile. But she felt something settle, like an agreement they hadn't spoken aloud, like he was saying, "You're not alone anymore." Back inside, she moved slowly through the cabin. Her fingers trailed over worn surfaces. The table, the shelf of books, the chipped cup she'd used. Every object carried the weight of a life lived in quiet. She imagined what Rusk's days were like here, waking alone, sleeping alone, choosing silence not because he had no words, but because no one had earned them. In a small tin on the shelf, she found a comb, wooden, simple. She sat by the fire and pulled it through her tangled hair, each knot a reminder, each pull a piece of the past leaving her. When he came back in, she didn't look up, just said quietly, "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the second syllable, but it didn't matter. He heard it. He set a loaf of hard bread and a tin of something dark, beans maybe, on the table, pulled a second chair from the wall. They ate in silence, but it was different now. Not hollow, not awkward, just quiet, like a field after thunder. After breakfast, she walked outside, bootless, in just her stockings, the cold bit at her toes, but she didn't care. She needed the wind, needed the sky, the trees, something to prove the world still existed. She walked to the edge of the tree line, where the snow turned to ice crystals on the pine needles. And that's when the memory hit. Her father's hands, rough but kind, lifting her onto a wagon seat. "Doesn't matter what they think, Sarah. You're worth more than any man in that town." The sound of his laugh, then the gunshots, then silence. She dropped to her knees, clutched her stomach, and sobbed. For the first time since that night, her body shook with it, heaving, raw. She pressed her face into the snow and let it take her. Rusk didn't come to her, didn't pull her back. He just waited, let her break in peace, because some silences weren't meant to be filled. When she finally stood again, her stockings soaked through and her face raw, he offered her a scarf. She took it, didn't say a word, but their hands touched when she did, and something passed between them, a truth that didn't need language. That night she slept in the cot. He took the floor, the fire burned warm, and she dreamed, not of death or blood or betrayal, but of trees swaying in the wind, and a man with quiet eyes who didn't ask her to explain. When she woke, the scarf was still around her neck, and the blanket still tucked around her shoulders. She turned to look at him. He was already watching her, not with expectation, just presence. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel afraid. The third morning began with the sound of branches breaking under snow. A soft sound, a living one, the kind the world only makes when no one's listening. But Seraphine was listening. Now she always did. Wrapped in the wool blanket, she stood by the window again, this time not watching for escape, but for rhythm. Toma Rusk had already gone outside. He left at dawn like he always did, without a word, just the quiet swing of the door, the soft thud of boots in snow, the creak of saddle leather. She had begun to recognize the pattern of his movements, the language of his silence. Every gesture carried meaning. She thought of the first night again, how he'd said nothing, yet somehow made her feel safer than any man who'd ever opened his mouth. She stepped outside barefoot, this time with the blanket still clutched around her like a memory. The snow bit at her feet, but it didn't stop her. She walked across the frozen clearing, following the faint trail of boot prints he'd left behind. They wove between the pines, curled around a boulder dusted white, and disappeared into a grove where the air was colder, and the trees stood like stone guardians. She found him there, not moving, just watching something beyond the trees. A single buck stood at the edge of the rise, antlers frosted in morning light, unmoving as rusk. They stared at each other, man and animal, until the buck blinked first and vanished into the woods. Seraphine didn't speak. She only watched him. He turned then, slowly, didn't smile, didn't frown, just nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of acceptance. She had followed, and he had let her. They walked back together in silence, but the kind of silence that hummed now, not empty, not broken, shared. Inside, she spoke first. "There's something I haven't told you." He didn't stop unpacking the rabbit he'd caught, just glanced up. "My father kept a map, hidden in the lining of his coat. Said it showed where the land turned gold beneath the rocks. He didn't want anyone to see it, not even me." She swallowed hard. "After they shot him, I found it. I took it." She reached into the folds of the dress she hadn't taken off since the wedding day, carefully folded and rewrapped since the day before, and pulled out a small strip of cloth. She hesitated before reaching for it. Not because she doubted what she had, but because holding it made it real again. The map still smelled faintly of pine and gunpowder. Her father's coat had soaked up both, in life and in death. She unwrapped it slowly, fingers trembling, each fold a memory. And when she finally laid it flat, she didn't look at Rusk. She couldn't. This wasn't about trust. This was about saying goodbye to innocence, to safety, and to the version of herself that still believed someone would come save her. No one did. Evelyn folded tightly, yellowed with age and stiff with dried blood. She handed it to Rusk. He took it, didn't unfold it. Not yet, just looked at her. They weren't just trying to silence me, she said. They were trying to keep this buried. He unfolded the cloth carefully. Inside, hand-drawn lines marked a ridge, a creek, and a single X stitched into the mountain face. He studied it, quietly, slowly, then folded it again and placed it back on the table. "They'll come for you again," he said at last. "Soon." She nodded. "I know." She didn't cry, didn't flinch, just met his gaze. "That's why I need to stop running. I need to go back. I need to prove what they did, what he did." She didn't say her husband's name, didn't need to. Rusk didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, hands folded over the table, breath shallow. Finally he said, "You'll need more than truth." That night, snow fell harder than any night before. The wind howled through the trees like wolves, and the fire in the cabin roared. Seraphine sat at the hearth, the map in her lap, her hands curled around a tin mug of tea she couldn't quite drink. Russ sat across from her again, sharpening a knife. Not for threat, for readiness. "You're not from around here," she said softly. He didn't look up. "No. You don't ask where I came from." "Don't need to," she smiled faintly. "Why?" Pain sounds the same in every language. Silence stretched again, but this time she broke it. "What about you?" He paused, set the knife down, leant back in his chair. "I was a scout, once, for the army." Her breath hitched. "You fought against your own?" "No," he said. "I stopped fighting for anyone." The fire cracked between them. "They took my brother, left him to rot in a trench because his blood wasn't white enough. They let me live, because I was half." He looked up finally, eyes like burnt cedar. "That's when I learned silence is a weapon, and a shield." Seraphine stood, crossed the room, sat down across from him on the floor. "Then maybe it's time we use it as something else," she said. "Like what?" "A promise." He didn't answer. But this time, when she leaned her head against the side of the chair, he didn't pull away. That night, neither of them slept. But they didn't need to, because for the first time, they weren't alone in the silence. The snow had turned to ice overnight. Not fresh and powder soft like before, but jagged, glazed, bitter. It made everything slower, heavier, but they moved anyway. Rusk saddled his horse in silence. Seraphine stood at the threshold of the cabin, arms folded tightly over her chest, watching him work. Her breath puffed white into the morning air, but she didn't seem to notice the cold anymore. She hadn't slept, not really, but something had shifted inside her. A resolve. She didn't speak it aloud, but Rusk felt it. It hung in the space between them like morning mist. She had made up her mind, and that meant they were leaving. Rusk checked the saddle straps twice. Then again. She didn't rush him. Some things were meant to be done slow. He turned toward her. "It's a day and a half to town," he said. His voice was low, rough like riverstone. "We take the long way. Keep off the main trails." She nodded. Then after a beat, "Do I ride?" "You'll ride." Another pause. "With you?" He met her eyes, then turned to the horse and mounted up. Reached out his hand. She hesitated only for a moment, then placed her hand in his and let him lift her. The first hour passed in silence. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But the way she leaned slightly into his chest, the way her hands didn't tremble even when the wind stung like knives, it said more than words ever could. By midday, they had reached the base of Elk Ridge. Rusk guided the horse beneath a canopy of frost, heavy pines. Icicles hung from branches like broken promises. Every crunch of hoof on frozen dirt echoed in the cold. "I came through here as a girl," Seraphine said suddenly. "My father used to hunt elk in these woods. We brought jerky to the church one winter when the harvest failed." Russ didn't answer, but he looked at her, and she knew he'd heard. Further down, they reached a small clearing, a place where the snow lay untouched. In the center stood the remains of a fire pit, long dead. A rusted tin kettle sat atop blackened stones. "That's ours," she whispered. "My father and I used to camp here. I forgot this place existed." She slid off the horse without waiting for help. Kneeling by the pit, she ran her fingers over the tin. The past rose around her like mist. "He said someday we'd build a cabin here, a real one. He wanted me to have a place that belonged only to me." Rusk dismounted, watched her quietly. "Do you want to stay a moment?" She shook her head. But I want to remember it." They continued on as the light began to fall behind the ridge. The shadows stretched longer now. Wolves howled in the distance. Not close, but not far. Seraphine tightened her grip on his coat. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked. "They won't," he replied. The honesty in it stung, but it was clean, sharp, not cruel. "Then why go back?" "Because the truth isn't for them," he said. "It's for you." She didn't answer. Didn't need to, because her arms didn't loosen. That night, they stopped beneath a rock overhang, barely enough cover for the two of them. Rusk built a fire from half-frozen wood. It smoked but didn't complain. Seraphine gathered pine branches for bedding. She worked quietly, methodically, no longer needing instruction. After they ate, dried beans, hard bread, snow melted into bitter tea, she reached into her satchel, pulled out the map, unfolded it slowly. "They think it's about gold," she said, "but he only ever talked about the land." She pointed to a curve near the creek line. "He said it was the only place he ever felt like a man. Not a burden, not a joke." She looked at Rusk. "Did you have a place like that?" He didn't answer right away, but eventually, "Once." "Where?" "It's gone now." The fire crackled. The wind whispered. Seraphine lay down on the bed of pine needles, curled toward the flames. "Can you sleep?" he asked. "I haven't in years." "You will." He didn't say it like a hope. He said it like a fact. As the night deepened, Seraphine found herself watching him, the way he sat with his back to the fire, the way his eyes scanned the trees even when all seemed still. "Do you think I'm wrong?" she asked softly. He turned toward her. "About what?" "Trying to fight this, going back, risking everything." He stared at her, then said, "You're not trying to fight it. You already are." She fell asleep before he did, and when the fire burned low, Rusk lay beside her, not touching, but close enough for her to feel it in her dreams. Not protection, not possession, just presence. At dawn, frost laced the trees like lace. Rusk woke her with a wordless touch to the shoulder. "We ride." They mounted again, and as the sun rose behind them, they rode down toward the town that had tried to bury her truth. Seraphine didn't look back at the clearing. She didn't have to. What mattered was ahead now, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it. The first sign of town was a broken fence post, splintered at the base, leaning like an old man with no one left to carry. Seraphine saw it as they came around the bend, pine trees giving way to open ground, the old trail narrowing between two hills. Snow still covered the path, but faint wagon tracks laced its surface. Life moved here, just not for her, not for a long time. She tightened her grip on the saddle horn. Rusk said nothing, didn't have to. His hand dropped gently to her wrist. A pause, a breath, then onward. Cedar Hollow hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered. The church steeple still rose high over the square, like a finger wagging at sinners. The general store still leaned crooked on its foundation. The air still smelled of old leather and burnt coal, but the faces had aged. The shutters looked tighter, and the silence that met them was louder than any gunshot. They rode slow down Main Street. Every eye followed them. Every voice dropped to a murmur. Some pretended not to stare. Others didn't bother. Women paused with baskets in hand. Children whispered behind gloves. Old men stiffened in their chairs outside the saloon, boots frozen mid-rock. But no one said her name. Not aloud. It hung there, ghost-like, between the snowflakes and suspicion. They passed the church first. She glanced at the steps, remembering. Her veil, white as winter. The man waiting at the top, smiled like carved wax. She had married him there, and died a little every day since. The sheriff stood in front of the jailhouse as if he'd been waiting. Tall, proud, mustache groomed to perfection, badge gleaming like a false promise. He watched her like she was a dog returned to the porch after running wild. "That him?" he asked, nodding toward Rusk. Seraphine didn't answer. Neither did Rusk. "You'll want to keep moving," the sheriff said, but it was a dare, not a warning. Rusk met his eyes, cold, unshaken. "We'll stop when we mean to." No louder than a whisper, but it cut through the air like an axe. They passed, and no one stopped them. Her old house came next. She froze in the saddle. The curtains were drawn, but the porch swing still creaked, lazily back and forth in the wind. A new coat of paint, same rotting bones. The place still smelled of roses and lies. "You okay?" Rusk asked. She shook her head, but didn't look away. "That window there," she said. "I used to sit by it every night, wondering why I couldn't breathe." She touched her chest. "Turns out, poison doesn't always come in bottles." They kept riding, past the mill, past the schoolhouse, and into the quieter side of town, where the buildings gave way to tall grass and old sheds. They stopped at a narrow shack just off the edge of the road. "Who lives here?" Rusk asked. "No one," she said. "Not anymore." She dismounted, walked slowly to the door, pushed it open. Dust, cobwebs, silence. But the smell, she knew it. Lavender, old paper, burnt sugar. Her grandmother had lived here once, before the fire, before the shame. She walked inside like she belonged to it still. Rusk followed, didn't speak, just watched her move. "I used to play here," she said, "when no one wanted me." She ran her fingers along a shelf, found an old brooch tucked between two books, clipped it to her coat. Didn't cry. "I'll leave a letter here," she said, "for Judge Mason. He used to respect my father. Will he believe you?" "He might. And if he doesn't?" She looked at Rusk, eyes clear. "Then we show them what belief never needed, proof." Outside, a little girl watched from the road. Torn dress, missing shoe, big eyes. Seraphine walked out and knelt beside her. "Do you know who I am?" she asked gently. The girl nodded. "They say you're cursed." "And what do you say?" The girl leaned close, whispered, "I think they're afraid of you." Seraphine smiled. "Good." She handed the girl the brooch. "Keep this. It'll remind you not to be small for anyone." They walked through the town once more before dusk. This time heads still turned, but something else passed in the silence now. Not just shame, not just scandal, something like memory. That night in the borrowed shack, Seraphine lit a candle, wrote a letter with hands that no longer shook. "They tried to bury me in silence," she wrote, "but silence is not the end. It is the root, and I have grown." She folded it, stamped it with her father's old seal, and placed it in the window, for the town to see, for the judge to find, for the truth to begin again. Rusk stood outside, staring at the stars. He didn't turn when she joined him. She simply stood beside him, their shoulders barely touching, but it was enough, because tomorrow would be louder. But tonight was quiet, and finally, the silence belonged to them. The letter reached the courthouse before dawn. It sat on Judge Mason's desk like a quiet threat, sealed in red wax, signed not with a name, but a memory. He read it once, then again. By mid-morning, the square had begun to fill. No announcement, no posters. But still they came. Old farmers with sun-cracked hats, shopkeepers who remembered her father's kindness, young girls who'd heard the rumors but not the truth. And in the shadows, leaning against the far post of the saloon porch, Rusk, arms crossed, eyes watching. Seraphine stood on the steps of the church-turned court, the place she'd been married, the place they tried to kill her. She wore no veil now, just a long, dark coat, weather-worn boots, and a face that would not look down. The sheriff stood beside her husband, still polished, still smug, but now with eyes that darted too much, hands that wouldn't stop tugging at his belt, and behind them, nervous men with too much silence between them. Judge Mason emerged, his robe worn but his voice steady. "We've received a declaration of false charges, accompanied by signed testimony, maps, letters, witnesses." He glanced over the crowd, then to Seraphine. You claim your husband, Mr. Elijah Brooke, conspired to frame you for attempted murder in order to silence your knowledge of illegal dealings, including land theft, bribery, and falsified mining claims. He paused. You cannot speak, but you brought the truth anyway. Seraphine held up the journal, her father's. Inside, Rusk had transcribed every entry she had whispered to him. Proof of meetings, names, locations, bank withdrawals, even coded messages her husband had failed to destroy. A hush fell, then a murmur. Then, "That's her voice," someone whispered, a child's voice. The little girl from before? She stood at the front now, holding the brooch. You said she was cursed, but maybe she was just right. The crowd rippled. The sheriff took a step forward. You don't know what she is. This woman's been touched in the head ever since. Enough, the judge snapped. The court recognizes her right to present evidence, and her right to be heard, whether by word or by witness. He turned to the gathered people. Does anyone here vouch for her? A woman stepped forward, graying hair, eyes sharp behind wire spectacles. She used to tutor my son, never took a cent, said knowledge should be given. Another voice, older, a hunched man with trembling hands. Her daddy saved this town once, fed half of us one winter. That mine? It was his, not theirs. Then another, and another. Voices rose, not in anger, but in memory. Russ stepped forward next. He didn't speak long, didn't need to. She never stopped fighting, he said. Not even when you took her voice. Not even when you left her to die. He pulled a folded cloth from his coat, her wedding veil. This isn't evidence, just a reminder of what you tried to bury. He dropped it at Elijah's feet. And what refused to stay buried? The judge spoke. Elijah Brooke. You are hereby placed under arrest pending full investigation. The sheriff moved, hand to holster. But Rusk was already there. Gun never drawn, just a hand on the lawman's wrist. A quiet shake of the head. The sheriff froze, then backed down. Elijah sneered. You think they'll remember any of this? She's still no one. A mute widow with dirt on her name. Seraphine stepped forward, took the journal, and wrote one word on the first blank page. She held it up. Survivor. The town didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But as Seraphine turned, as she walked down those steps with her head high and her eyes forward, they stepped aside, and some even bowed their heads. Later, as dusk bled into lavender, Seraphine stood at the edge of town. Rusk waited by the horse. Ready? He asked. She nodded, but didn't mount yet. She turned, faced the town one last time. Not in rage, not in sadness, just finality. She climbed up behind him, no need for words, no need for destination, just the road, the sky, and someone who had listened when no one else did. She was never supposed to win, not in a place like that, not with a voice taken from her and a noose waiting in the square, but she did, because truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks quietly. Sometimes it rides beside a man who doesn't need to ask questions to understand the answers. And sometimes it returns to the very town that tried to erase it and leaves it with nothing but memory and regret. She didn't need to speak, because now they would never forget her name again. Did you feel what she felt? Would you have believed her when no one else did, or stayed silent like the rest of the town? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in quiet courage. Wild West Stories, where silence speaks louder than words.